Hey folks, this is Vince with Dad's Gaming Addiction, and today we're going to quickly check out Dragon Soul. This is a game for 2 to 4 players. It's for ages 10 and up, and the average play time is about 30 to 60 minutes. This will be a rules teach today, so by the end of this video you should know how to play it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the components before we get started. Here's a quick look at the box and the box insert here. And there's a couple of baggies here. The rule book is actually double-sided. The actual rules take you up to about this point, which is roughly, I want to say 8 pages or so. And then if you flip this over, it's the book of maps. Players will be choosing a map to play on for every game. So it'll sort of outline how to set up the map that you choose. So let's a quick look at the rulebook there. We'll get into more of that later. These border tiles and these tiles here will set up the map for you, again, via the book of maps here. You've got player boards here. There's 4 of them, 1 for each player, and you can choose any color you want. On the back side is a guide on how combat works. I'll get into that in a little bit. And on the reverse side is sort of the breakdown of what you do during a turn. And there's also another guide for combat over here with regards to dragons. Again, I'll get to that later. But so these are different player boards. There are also cards, and they come with different kinds of troops. For example, there's an archer card there. There's a knight card there, and so on. There's also these soul stones, and these soul stones will help you summon a dragon. Yeah, you can actually control a dragon in this game. There are also various tokens and tiles, and I'll get into what they all do in a little bit. So, to set up the game, you're going to choose a map from the Book of Maps. Again, the Book of Maps is on the reverse side of the rulebook. In this case, I chose Perilous Proximity for this particular example. You're going to put the frames out on the edges like this, and the icons don't really seem to matter for gameplay, but you're free to copy it exactly if you want to. But you will want to pay attention to these because they do change from map to map. You're going to put the forests and the grass tiles and the dragon spots all within accordance to the picture here. And if you see a colored X, that is for the start player for blue and red. So in this case, the blue castle will start here, and a red castle will start here. Speaking of actual players, each player is going to get a ton of different tokens. Players will get these square tokens numbered 1 through 6. They're also going to get these circular tokens also numbered 1 through 6. They work hand in hand in helping a player keep track of their battalions, which we'll get into in a little bit. Players also get these square castles similar to that one, and they'll be able to place these on grass tiles as they expand their empire. Players will also get a dragon token of their color in case they happen to spawn a dragon. And then also they've got this reserves token, which we'll put cards under that a little bit later. There is a huge deck of cards. They're called soldier cards. However, don't be confused. The rulebook doesn't mention this, but there's a couple of these soul stone cards in here. You're going to want to include these in the soldier cards. I mean, but the majority of these cards are soldiers. Again, there's knights and archers and spearmen and the like, but you're going to shuffle this huge deck of cards, including the soul stones, and just put it off to the side for now. Now, I showed this tile to you before. This tile is a player board that keeps track of what you do on your turn, and as far as combat, whether it's with a dragon or with battalions, you can decide whether or not you want to include this or not. This is more of a reference than anything, but for now, I'm going to keep these off to the side because, well, they're just going to get in the way. So, but yeah, definitely include these with your setup as well so you can keep track of how these particular combats are supposed to play out. So the game is played over a series of turns until someone wins. The victory condition will actually be listed on the bottom of the map that you choose. In this case, it's 5 castles to win. So you need to have a certain number of castles under your control uncontested until your following turn in order to win. So for this particular map, blue or red would need to have 5 uncontested castles under their control until their next turn, and then they would win the game. And to do that, you're going to be moving battalions around and taking over castles and trying to capture territory, spawning dragons, and all of that good stuff. Now, the first player is chosen randomly. Choose whatever method you want. And for a player's first step of their turn, what they're going to do is one of 2 things. They're either going to draw a single card from this deck for every castle that they have out here, or they're going to spawn a new castle, assuming that they have a battalion there. Castles can only be spawned on these grassy areas. They cannot be spawned into these forests. So just to recap, first part of a player's turn, draw a card for every castle that you have, or create a new castle onto one of these grassy areas, assuming you've got a battalion there. And these battalions on the board are represented by these circles. Now, I'm not going to get into specifics of that yet because, well, we don't know how to spawn battalions, okay? So that is the quick overview of what the first part of a player's turn looks like. It's worth mentioning that for your very first turn of the game, you must draw a card for every castle that you have. So the second part of a player's turn is to spawn battalions if they wish to. Now, keep in mind, I kind of fast-forwarded time a little bit, and let's just assume that blue now has these cards in their area. So they're going to choose any number of these cards that they want to form that battalion. Let's just say that they chose the archer and the knight, but didn't want to play the swordsman because reasons, okay? What they're going to do to deploy this is put the 1 token, because they have no battalions yet, they're going to put the 1 battalion token on top of this, and then the matching 1 near a castle that they control, so onto this particular space here. Now, it's worth mentioning that this is more than just one space. The center counts as one space, but kind of like in Settlers of Catan, these corner spaces also count as spaces, and that will come into play later as we move these guys around. But you're going to go ahead and spawn this particular one right in the center of where a castle might be. So it kind of spawns right here. And any cards that you choose not to deploy, you're going to put into your reserves. Now, in the future, you will be able to pull cards from your reserve and then add them to an existing battalion, so as long as they are near or on a friendly castle like this. It's worth mentioning you are limited on how many battalions you can have on the actual table, and that limit is represented by how many castles you have in play. So if you only have 1 castle in play, you can only have 1 battalion out here. You can continue adding to it, but you can only have 1 battalion out here until you get a second castle onto one of these grassy areas. The third part of a player's turn involves the movement of battalions and dragons. And keep in mind, I did fast forward time a little bit just to show you some examples. I added a second battalion right here. In battalion order, starting from 1, you're going to go ahead and move them 1 space. Now keep in mind, these corners count as a space, so you cannot move a battalion from a center space to a center space. They first have to get to one of the corners and then move into the center. So 1 could move here, for example, and 2 could move to the center of this one, for example. Now, in order to actually move here, you need to have a soul stone available to you. And luckily, battalion number 2 does have a soul stone along with 2 knights in this battalion. So what's going to happen here is you're going to discard not only the soul stone, but every other card in battalion 2, and it pretty much wipes out at that point. And then you're going to spawn this dragon in place of that battalion, and now you've got a dragon on the battlefield. And dragons will move after every battalion has had a chance to move. Now, dragons' movement, rather than moving 1 space to an adjacent, I mean, you can do that, but it can actually fly to any other space that you would like. It cannot attack in the same turn if you move it, but it can fly pretty much anywhere you need it to be. So these dragons do have some movement restrictions. Yes, they can fly to pretty much any spot they want to, but they are not allowed to land on castles, and they are not allowed to attack enemy battalions that are inside castles, so they are limited in that regard. They also cannot travel to the center of a boneyard space from whence they came. So once they leave the spot, they cannot come back to that particular area. But for the most part, anywhere else is valid. Of course, like with the battalions, you can't have 2 battalions on top of each other, and a dragon cannot be on top of a battalion. So let's talk about combat for a minute. There's 2 kinds of combat. There's combat involving dragons, so dragon versus battalion, and the other type of combat is just battalion versus battalion, and they're handled in slightly different ways. When it comes to dragon versus battalion, that's where these tokens come into play. One player will have the dragon token, and the other player will have the battalion token. And then secretly, players will choose a side and reveal them at the same time. And then depending on what was chosen, there is a chart in the rulebook. Feel free to pause the video here if you want to see this in greater detail, but depending on the results of those token phases, you'll see some various things might happen. The entire battalion might be defeated, the dragon might be defeated, a stalemate, no action, or half of the battalion defeated, rounded up. Defender chooses which cards to discard. So again, depending on your choices with these tokens, different things will happen in the outcome with a dragon versus a battalion. So battalion versus battalion combat operates a little bit differently, and it's also a bit more complicated. So what players are going to do in this situation, and I have to stress that you cannot move and then attack, you can only attack or move, and you have to be one space away from the opponent, just kind of like what a dragon can do. A dragon cannot fly then attack, it either flies or it attacks. So in this case, on this 1v1 here, let's just say that, and again, these cards would normally be off to the side, but I'm having them here for example purposes. Each player is going to choose a card, and let's say that blue is attacking, and then they're going to reveal that card at the same time. So let's just say that blue decides to reveal this card, and red decides to reveal this card, and again, all at the same time. And we're going to take a look at either the text on the bottom of these cards, or you can take a look at the chart in the rulebook, which outlines how this is supposed to play out. And there's a lot of different scenarios. And in case of a tie, the attacker wins. In case of a tie, defender wins, depending on the unit type, and this beats that. And it's a big rock, paper, scissors thing. But again, you can also look at the text here. And again, your player boards also have this information too, if you want to use that. So in this case, the swordsman attacks, attacker wins versus other swordsman, wins versus archer. So the swordsman actually beats the archer. And again, blue is the attacking player. Now it's worth mentioning that whether or not you can reuse a card depends on whether or not you're attacking or defending. If you survived the attack, in this case the defender red survived this confrontation, archer versus swordsman, he gets to reuse the swordsman because he is the defender. Whereas the attacker, well, he's dead. But had the attacker won, he would still have to put this under his battalion token to be used in the future. Okay, but in this case, he did lose that exchange, so this archer just goes away into the discard pile. And then the battle continues. The attacker can decide to stop if they want to, or they can keep going. Let's just say he reveals this one, and at the same time, his opponent reveals this one. This is a knight versus knight kind of situation. Attacker wins versus other knight, so the attacker wins against the defender here. This one goes away into the discard pile. And because he's already used this once as the attacker, this goes back underneath the battalion token here to be used for future reference. So again, combat is a little bit more sticky when it comes to battalion versus battalion because the attacker can only use a card one time, whereas the defender can reuse a card if they succeed in that particular combat. If there was a deciding victor, let's say that red had wiped out blue, they would simply replace that particular token as such, and then the blue battalion token would be removed from the board. So kind of circling back to the whole object of this game, you're trying to capture and conquer these castles. Whenever you have a battalion adjacent to an enemy castle, it is considered contested. And again, you're trying to have so many uncontested castles in the area, and then when your next turn comes around, if you still have that many, you end up winning the game. In this particular example, the blue battalion 1 is contesting this one and contesting this one, even though there's an enemy battalion already present there. It's worth mentioning that contested castles do not count toward a battalion limit. For example, in this case, red has 2 castles, so normally they would have a maximum battalion limit of 2. But because these are contested, technically their maximum battalion population cap is 0 because these are both contested. Any existing ones still remain on the table, but he cannot spawn any new ones until he gets 2 back out here. Now, to capture a castle, you just simply walk right onto a castle that doesn't have any enemy battalions on it. Once you capture it, you keep the battalion there. You just simply replace the castle with your own, and off you go. It's worth mentioning that in order to capture a castle with a battalion on it, first you have to defeat that battalion, and then once you do, you're able to move on to it, and then you can capture that as well. And in this case, there's no more red castles on the table, so that's pretty much game over for red. And there you have it, a quick look at Dragon Soul, the board game, and how to play it. If you're interested in picking this game up for yourself, I'll put a link to the official website in the below description, or you can go to dragonsoulboardgame.com. The actual game here is, it looks like it's $40 right now, down from 60. So if you want to get it on a discount, now's the time to do it. The game also has a digital rulebook, so if you want to read a digital rulebook before you actually get into the game, it is available on that same website, but I'll put a link in the below description for you anyway. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If you guys haven't already, subscribe to me on Twitch and YouTube. That way you can stay up to date with any new content I have to publish. This is Vince. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Take care.